Now, you're with Julian E. Brown-Tano, the internet's laziest music nerd. Now, it's awards season. Every single year I run through my albums of the year on one show, films of the year on another, and tracks of the year as the final show just before Christmas. Last year it was dominated by the end of decade lists, which was 6 weeks. But this year it's, in the lead up to this, I said it's a year of a lot across the board on tracks, songs, and albums and movies. Lots of 8 out of 10s, not many 9s. So it's been a much more low-key year than usual. But on the flip side, it's also a little bit less hectic, as I normally try and squeeze too much to fit into a 2-hour radio show. And it's all pretty easy going this time. Another reason it's easy going is quite a lot of the acts on here, even ones that aren't historically associated with it, are pretty much pop tracks, particularly towards the end. Which also means a lot of them are a sub 4 minutes, which is handy for me. So without further ado, I'll just run through on this show my top 25 albums of 2020. And next week it will be my best and worst films of the year. And the final show, if I do end up putting this on YouTube, the final show, the tracks will not be on there because it's just pointless. I do a bit of talking this week and a lot more with the movies, but the tracks are it's just going to be an all music show, so it won't be any point. So my 25th album of 2020, from Maryland in America, someone I fell in love with 2013's Dream River album, one of my favourites of the decade. And it is kind of guy that seems to percolate albums for years, and came back with the wonderful double album last year, Shepherd in a Sheepskin Vest. Now, he's followed it straight away with another beautiful record called Gold Record, which I featured around, I think, August time. So from that, my 25th album of the year, from Bill Callahan, who used to record as Smog, and has about 20 albums to his discography, and has settled further and further into his career like furniture. This is Another Song. That was Bill Callahan kicking off the Brownout Top 25 Albums of 2020. Should be a breeze. And I wouldn't say it was my favourite of those 3 that I mentioned, but I still think it is another beautiful record. And he's one of these people, like certain actors, it's nice to spend time with him, just listening to his albums, whether they're brilliant or whether they're just very good. Just having him in the room, somehow comforting in these troubling times. At number 24, the most fun debut album of the year. Possibly a joke outfit. I mentioned when I was playing it to death back in September time that some people are saying, is it a joke at people's expense? And I said, does it matter? Because it is just ridiculously good fun and the tunes are amazing. It was a little bit sugar heavy to ingest over a long period of time on multiple occasions. It's the kind of album you go back into. But it's terrific fun from Bradford's Bad Boy Chiller crew, who embody the discombobulated dance scene in the north of England, which has always been kind of segregated from London or Liverpool or Manchester, where all the sort of major things happen. They've got their own thing going on. And every now and again, it sort of crosses over to the mainstream. They're incredibly good fun. They've got their own YouTube pranky sort of channel thing, which has gone ballistic. And the tunes themselves are absolute riot. So it may contain swearing, but the debut album from Bradford's Bad Boy Chiller crew, Full Whack No Breaks, was my 24th best album of the year. And this track may contain swearing. Guns up. I noticed Pitchfork, the esteemed media publication, released their top 100 songs of the year, and WAP by Cardi B was number 1. It's pretty tragic that they've chosen a song from its cultural mainstream media impact rather than being any good at all. I'm not holding out any hope for their albums either, because it's just going to be Fiona Apple, and they decided that the second they gave it 10 out of 10. You're with Julian, counting down my top 25 albums. That was the debut from Bad Boy Chiller crew, Full Whack No Breaks, so much fun. And that was Guns Up. And at 23, a Brighton four-piece, notably fronted by Dana Margolin. Other members, George E. Stott, Maddie Royal and Sam Yardley. Arguably the best indie rock in the traditional sense debut of the year from Porridge Radio from Brighton in the UK. Oh, as an aside, there will be some movie reviews, but not on this show. So I'm afraid those ones will only make the podcast, the Brownout movie review, and probably the Brownout YouTube channel. But that will be Mank, the David Fincher film, which I gave a really good review to, and also Aliens, a retro review there, and a 10 out of 10. This is from a brilliant debut from Porridge Radio, and one of the best indie rock albums in a relatively flat year for indie rock. This is Lilac, which has a slow burn tale that really does fit this year. So this is a bit more in the road rap arena. It's Momodu Laminjallo from Stratford in London, which is just up the road from where I'm from, East Ham. And Jay Huss is the recording name, and his second album, Big Conspiracy, was an early favourite this year from January. And like everyone in his field, he seems to get an enormous amount of unwanted attention from the police. This track probably will contain swearing, and at 22, Jay Huss, Big Conspiracy, and Fortune Teller.
You the one that I want, yeah, me nah, you know, she know I want her.
Yo, with Julian on the Brownout, counting down my top 25 albums of 2020. Next week will be my best and worst films, which will have a massive amount of worst films. And then finally, tracks of the year. It's not been an amazing year for indie music, indie guitar music. I've gone on at length on this show how it has been reborn these last 5 years. But then it's not been a really great year for any genre of music, I don't think. Lots of 8s, not many 9s. One of the bands that I focused on the most in recent last 5 years has been Joe Casey, Greg Ahe, Alex Leonard and Scott Davidson from Detroit, Michigan, and Proto Martyr. I missed their first couple of albums. But their third, The Agent Intellect in 2015 and Relatives in Descent 2017, I featured on this show, and I did so with their fifth, Ultimate Success Today, I think underrated, and this from it, The Aphorist at 21. Nicholas Jarre has long been established one of the preeminent musical forces in electronica across a wide range. His solo name albums under the name Nicholas Jarre have been immaculately sculpted and were released many years apart. But he seems to have found a much more appealing paradigm on releasing music now. Last year he put out Against All Logic, which was dance floor bass cuts and a collection of those, and that was brilliant up to 2017. This year, he released the 2017 to 2019 Against All Logic album, and it worked much better as an album. And he's also released 2 solo albums this year, and he's reignited the wonderful Pink Floyd-influenced Dark Side project. So that's going to be releasing new music as well. And I saw those live. I saw Nicholas Jarre live. That was mind-blowing. So Against All Logic trumps the 2 solo albums for me. I thought it worked really, really well front to back as an album. At number 20, If Loving You Is Wrong. At number 19, Juliana Barwick, who grew up in Louisiana, and she has a very ambient choral take on Americana. I featured all of her albums, The Magic Place from 2011, Nepenthe at 2013, Will in 2016, and Healing is a Miracle, which came out this year, I thought was probably the best of the lot, and certainly the most interesting, as she bent her styles more into other forms of music and had feature artists more than on other records, including Johnsy from Sigur Rós. And this track at number 19 from Healing is a Miracle, Nod featuring No Such Thing. Now, Timothy El Padro Thedford, now known as El Padro F Electronica Allah, also known as J Electronica. He arrived in 2007 and was immediately heralded as the next big thing in rap. And since then, he became something of a laughingstock, the occasional brilliant track and a long-promised debut album that never materialised. Well, out of nowhere, it did indeed materialise this year. A Written Testimony came out and it was brilliant. And not only that, but he recently followed it up with Act 2, The Patents of Nobility, which was a collection of other stuff. So he's now got 2 albums out in the space of a year, but it was a really great album. And at number 18, A Written Testimony, it will contain swearing, I believe, featuring The Dream. This is Ezekiel's Wheel. That was Ezekiel's Wheel, and obviously Jay-Z's all over that album. That was A Written Testimony at 18. You're with Julian counting down my top 25 of the year album-wise. And I've spoken at long length about my love for Chicago, Illinois, and now, well, originally Missouri, but now in Chicago, Illinois, Angel Olsen, and I featured her last few albums. Last year, she released the Maximalist All Mirrors album. This year, she released A Whole New Mess, which was some new tracks, but also minimalist reworkings. Well, not reworkings, because these were the original versions of the songs that she ditched to make a much more maximalist pop album. And I actually liked it more. And this is We Are All Mirrors, which was the title track of that album last year, done in a far, far more minimalist style, and I actually do prefer it. At number 17. At number 16, well, if I was to go on music I'd listen to the most this year, both mixtapes by Pop Smoke, aka Bashar Baraka Jackson, would probably be very near the top of the list, but one came out in June last year. I got them both at the same time on release of Meet the Woo 2, which came out, I think, at the very start of February, and by the time I actually got to playing them on the show a few days later, he'd been shot and killed in a home invasion. And he'd already cast a huge shadow over American rap music and was the next de facto big thing. And also a pioneer of using UK drill as opposed to Chicago drill as a style, using UK drill producers to get a very, very gritty style, which I absolutely adored. Later in the year, about halfway through, they released his debut album, Shoot for the Stars, and it was rubbish. It was just a mishmash of styles, endless. Unlike his very focused, very stylistically coherent 2 mixtapes. So I've got Meet the Woo 2 in my albums of the year at 16, and Shake the Room featuring Quavo will contain swearing. Peter Kember in the 1980s formed the magical Spacemen 3, still highly lauded as one of the best bands of their sort of drone psych music ever. And they split up in acrimony with Jason Pierce. I can't believe I never ring. It's like one of my favourite bands of all time. I think Jason Pierce. Who was in Spacemen 3? Jason Pierce, I was right. That's because I had a school friend called Jason Pierce. It's not the real name. Jason Pierce went on to huge acclaim and attention to this day for Spiritualized. And Peter Kember, as Sonic Boom, only released one album in 1990 called Spectrum, and I think he recorded as Spectrum for many years. But in recent years, he's come back a lot. And he's worked with some really interesting people on Panda Bear's album Tomboy, and Tomboy and Panda Bear Meets the Grim Reaper, and the Beach House album 7, and I noticed when I featured that, his influence on that album was special. He came back with a second solo studio album of Sonic Boom this year, All Things Being Equal, which bizarrely came out in 2 formats. One was about 70 minutes long, and one was about an hour and 40 minutes long. I got the latter one. I featured it on the show, and I love it, and I don't understand why it's not got more attention. If you like long-form psychedelia, it is absolutely top tier. From that, Things Like This, one of the most straightforward tracks on it. It's an album that flits between tracks like that, long-form sort of psychedelic pop, and 10-minute long, very often challenging and weird, almost soundtrack work. You could have, so I mentioned when the album came out that it could have featured in those Nicolas Cage sci-fi films like The Colour Out of Space or Mandy. That's Sonic Boom, one of the most underappreciated albums of the year, all things being equal, at number 15, and Things a Little Bit Deeper. I think Peter Kember might live in Sydney, you know. I think, on his story, I think he records under a different name electronically, and I met him with a mate, not knowing who he was, and we started talking about music, and I started talking about this artist. I can't remember the name of it, and saying how good I thought they were, and my mate was, that's him, that's Peter Kember. That was 15, and 14, I mentioned UK rap's resurgence, and UK drill. The reigning king of UK drill is probably Heady One, Irving Ajay. I think he's from Tottenham. Yep, from Tottenham, from a legendary housing project in Tottenham, which has actually become a model for Europe, one of the safest housing projects in Europe now. And it was in the Thatcher years, it was one of the, was it Toxteth? It was one of the main flashpoints for race riots and working class people revolting. He's had a fair amount of trouble with the police, a lot, as most UK drill artists have done in the UK. They even took to the point where the UK police were asking YouTube to take down the videos. Never seen so much interference with art before. Excuse me. He's released 7 mixtapes, and the last few have been very, very big. But he released Edna, a brilliant debut proper solo album that came out earlier this year, and I featured on the show, and I've played tracks throughout the year from it since. Not that long ago, maybe only September. So from Heady One's debut, Edna will contain swearing and a wonderful sample, and Stormzy appears on this track too. This is Ain't It Different. 14. At number 13, the biggest slow burn of the year was the latest Tame Impala album, The Slow Rush, which I didn't care for on release very much. But every time I've gone back to it over the year, it sounds richer and more detailed. It's just, I guess after Currents was such a maximalist slam in the face, it was a much more subdued and low-key release that sort of crept up on me. A fantastic album. And at number 13, and this track from it, The Slow... Oh, borderline. On time, 1 hour into a 2-hour show, and I've played half the amount of tracks. I'm doing my top 25 albums of the year. Next week will be my best films and the worst films. Probably 10 of each this year, as there's probably as many interesting bad films to slate as there are good films to praise. I just saw Mank. I absolutely loved it, but it will depend on whether you like it on paper, whether you think it's the most pretentious twaddle ever. But I actually really liked it. At number 12, it's a very long established story how LP and Killer Mike, I actually featured both their albums as solo artists back to back as they came out a week apart. I think Killer Mike's RAP Music, which featured Reagan, which is one of my tracks of the decade, and that was produced by LP. A week later, LP's, I think, Cancer for the Cure, or is that the Eels song? Something like that came out, and they were both great. And over the course of the next year, they decided that they liked working together. So the two old heads steeped in hip-hop history formed Run the Jewels, and RTJ4, the ridiculously consistent project, came out this year, their 4th great album in a row, and well established as one of the premier forces in rap music. RTJ4 at 12, and Ooh La La, and this is very old school, very boom bap, featuring 2 old school legends, Greg Nice and DJ Premier, no less, of Gangstar, will contain swearing. At number 12, at number 11, Canada's Claire Boucher has gone through a strange phase. I thought Miss Anthropocene, she records under the name of Grimes, was one of her best efforts. I thought the individual songs were really strong. The songwriting on it was excellent, the pop hooks and everything. And I really loved the 90s retro alt-rock vibe that appeared on a lot of tracks. I think this one in particular. It could have done with a little bit of trimming here and there, and they left off the best track, which was We Appreciate Power, which came out as a single before, which would have really set things off and really solidified that 90s alt-rock vibe that seems to be everywhere now. But along the way, she married Elon Musk, the world's 2nd richest man, who is known for pronouncements which are not exactly cool. And it's put her in a weird place. I don't think she's it's almost harmed her brand being associated with him. I can see it coming a cropper as well, because she's very right on. He isn't, and he's sort of a blunderbuss when it comes out with statements about things. So I won't be surprised if that union doesn't last. And she had a kid as well this year. But I thought Miss Anthropocene was an excellent album and full of tracks this good. You'll Miss Me When I'm Not Around at number 11. You're with Julian on the Brown Note, counting down my top 25 albums of the year. Countdown time at 25, Bill Callahan Gold Record. 24, the debut by Bradford's Bad Boy Chiller Crew. Full Whack No Breaks. Another UK debut, Every Bad by Porridge Radio at 23. J Huss, Big Conspiracy, his second at 22. Proto Martyr, Ultimate Success Today at 21. Nicholas Giles Against All Logic Collection, his second one. 2017 to 2019 at 20. Juliana Barwick, Healing's Miracle at 19. J Electronica's long-awaited and brilliant A Written Testimony debut album at 18. Angel Olsen's All Mirrors Retread, Whole New Mess at 17. Pop Smoke, his last living release, Meet the Woo 2 at 16. Sonic Boom, aka Peter Kemba at 15, with All Things Being Equal. Edna, the debut proper from Heady One, another UK rap artist, at 14. Tame Impala's Slow Burning, The Slow Rush at 13. Run the Jewels' fourth album, RTJ 4 at 12. And that was Miss Anthropocene from Grimes at 11. You'll Miss Me When I'm Not Around. Now, while the press around the world have jumped on Korean pop music or J-pop being the next big thing, K-pop and J-pop have never really amounted to anything. And most of the coverage now is just relentless BTS coverage. The whole decade that they've been ploughing this field, the next big thing or the next dominant force in world pop has become Latin pop. It really has taken over. And you look on YouTube at the artists with billions and billions of views, and they're all Latin pop artists. And at the very top are people like J Balvin, Ozuna, who I played earlier in the year, probably still Daddy Yankee, and arguably leading the charge is Bad Bunny, Benito Antonio Martinez Ocasio. That's an AOC style name. He's only released 2 studio albums, including this one at number 10, opening my top 10, YHLQM DLG. But in between, he's released lots and lots and lots of other releases. By way of example, 2 more albums came out this year. A collection, compilation album, and a third one called El Último Tour del Mundo, which last weekend became the first all-Spanish language album to top the Billboard Top 200 albums. So this is from that, a long list of letters from Bad Boy Bunny. Well, that's Collision Made in Heaven, Bad Boy Chiller Crew, and Bad Bunny. This is from Bad Bunny's YHLQMDLG album at number 10, Pero Ya No. At number 9, an artist that is probably my favourite rapper, being an old head. Freddie Gibbs from Indiana, from Gary, Indiana, and particularly what he's been known for, his album-length collaborations with producers. He recorded 2 of the best albums the last decade with Madlib, Pinata, and Bandana. And he's also recorded a couple of albums now with The Alchemist, another very fated old head producer. And Alfredo was one of the year's highlights in rap. It's my top-ranked rap album of the year, called Alfredo. And it really had a heart and soul to it. And part of that was really interesting, which was Black Americans, particularly in the rap music genre, and their fascination with the American-Italian mafia, and the fact that the often elements in the American-Italian mafia are incredibly racist towards African-American men. And this weird sort of dichotomy is a very unusual concept for an album. And this track features Rick Ross, who was once a laughingstock of rap, but very successful, and now is so well regarded he's one of the few features to turn up on a Freddie Gibbs or a Pusha T album. He was on Daytona, and he's on Alfredo as well. And this track may end up in my tracks of the year. I noticed it was in Pitchfork. Scotty Beam will contain swearing. At number 9. At number 8, one of the most talented musicians in the world is Yves Tumor. Sean Bowie, real name, from America but based in Turin in Italy. And I missed the first, I think, self-released albums when Man Fails You and Serpent Music, which got a lot of acclaim. But I absolutely loved Safe in the Hands of Love from 2018. That was in my albums of the year, and so is this, Heaven to a Tortured Mind. Everything he's done is brilliant, really wide-ranging, very sort of wild in his musical choices and his song construction and the arrangements, and really goes out. It rocks a lot, this album, as well. It's a very hard artist to actually put a label on. So from Yves Tumor's latest, Heaven to a Tortured Mind, at number 8, a good example of how wild his music is, Dream Palette. Number 7, an album that may well feature in no one else's lists apart from the public's, because the public loved it, and so did I. The Strokes are one of the most important bands of the century. Is This It was ground zero, along with the White Stripes, for the garage rock indie guitar revival, which was colossal, and Room on Fire was a brilliant album, but since then they've really struggled with the weight of expectation and that albatross of a 10 out of 10 album around their neck. The reason I've kept on board is every album they've released, even though it's often been pretty average, usually has a couple of really brilliant songs to add to their discography. This time around, completely different, working with Rick Rubin, who's just got everywhere over his career. The new Abnormal, their 6th album, I thought didn't actually have so much in the way of the big tracks. It's just that it was consistently their best album since Room on Fire. And I absolutely loved it to listen to as a front-to-back album. It felt like they were trying not to... Like every album that's come out, it's felt like they've tried so hard, stylistically all over the place, to make something that ranks alongside Is This It? This is their most relaxed album by far. It doesn't sound like they're trying to do anything, and it really paid off. And lots of really good tunes. At number 7, The Strokes, The New Abnormal, just checking the time, Brooklyn Bridge to Chorus. At number 6 in my albums of 2020, Fleet Fox's 4th album, Sure. Relentlessly perfect project so far. And a bit like Tame Impala now, in that the band leader, Robin Pecknold, pretty much made all of this music himself without any other band member. And like Tame Impala and Kevin Parker, it seems like the band exists now more as a touring entity. I thought it was a fantastic album. It was a lot less fractured and abstract than their previous album. Was it Crack Up? Which was a lot sort of, where the songs would be multi-part, and a less easy album to love. This was a punchier album and full of much more straightforward songs. From that, at number 6, from Sure, A Young Man's Game. And into the top 5 in my albums of 2020, and another album that won't get picked by anyone else. It never got any critical acclaim when it came out. It got good reviews where they even bothered to review it. Back in 2010, Salem from Michigan, who were then Heather Marlett, Jack Donahue and John Holland, were a hugely controversial act, but their debut album, King Knight, was one of my best of the decade. And since then, they've just been completely silent, never followed it up, and just randomly appeared in September with a 10-year gap follow-up. Fires in Heaven, a beautifully curated half-hour listen. I thought it did everything that they did brilliantly on that first album, including stuff like shoegaze and trap elements, and expanded it into new areas. And it was so well curated, the flow of the album. I don't understand why it's not got more attention. At number 5, Fires in Heaven. And this track, Old Gods, is pretty much the best 9 Inch Nails track I've heard in 10 years. It could contain swearing, I'm not sure, because I can't really understand what they're saying. And Fires in Heaven, no one loved it, I loved it. My 5th best album of the year, and that was Old Gods. And number 4, an artist that I'd written off a long time ago, didn't need to listen to anything that he'd really made since the late 60s. But never lost his kudos, really. I just wasn't that interested in lesser albums by him, unlike Neil Young, who continued to provoke and challenge with interesting new music. I never found myself drawn to any of his music. And he seemed to just switch on magically and suddenly become engaged very much with the world and not inside his insular bubble, and seemed to reach out to the audience more than he'd ever done in recent decades. And in fact, this album was preceded by a number of albums, including covers of standards and so on. But Rough and Rowdy Ways, just the 39th studio album by Bob Dylan, was his best for many years. A stunning piece of work, spectral, beautiful spectral instrumentation throughout, one of the most gentle lived-in sounds of the year. And the lyrics are like a book. It's densely worded, over 70 minutes long, and he references life, the universe, and everything in a very relatable way. And it's my fourth best album of the year, and the opener, I Contain Multitudes, is a sonic representation of that gentle style of instrumentation and also the beautiful lyric flow. At number 4, Bob Dylan, Rough and Rowdy Ways. To the top 3, and an artist that has lived 100 lives already, the Flaming Lips, from the 1980s. Went through various stages. Tangerine blew up because of was it Beverly Hills 90210? But they really reached their peak of universal acceptance by becoming arguably the biggest alternative rock band or indie rock band in the world over the course of 2 majestic albums around the turn of the century. Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots and The Soft Bulletin, both landmark classic masterpieces of incredible psych pop music. And they've never been bad. It's just sort of been, they've become a festival touring act, and their best music has been their most obtuse since then. But they came back out of nowhere with American Head, an astonishingly ambitious concept album that flows from start to finish, and has some very deep lyrical themes about existence and drugs and his hometown, and it's a very personal album. All the tracks are brilliant, the instrumentation is wild and inventive throughout, and it's undoubtedly the best Flaming Lips album since Yoshimi, probably 18 years ago. A massive album from the Flaming Lips, American Head, at number 3. And this track, Dinosaurs on the Mountain, really showcases them at their Pink Floyd-indebted anthemic psych pop best. Next week, and my tracks of the year are the following last new show of the year. That was Dinosaurs on the Mountain. And number 2, Will Westerman from the UK, records under the name Westerman, another album that's just not getting any love. It's an amazing debut album. Your Hero Is Not Dead. It's a very interesting style he's got, almost like yacht pop. It's very subdued, very subtle, and he continually drops a shoulder after sort of low-key verses into sublime choruses and bridges. Easily exemplified on this track. My second favourite album of the year. Doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Will Westerman, known as Westerman. Your Hero Is Not Dead, at number 2 in my albums of the year. And this track, Easy Money. My number 2 album of the year, Countdown Time. You're with Julian on the Brownout Top 25 albums of the year. The top 10 were Bad Bunny, YHL, QMDLG, Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist at 9. With Alfredo, Eve Two More, Heaven to a Tortured Mind at 8, The Strokes' brilliant comeback album, The New Abnormal, at 7, Always Consistent Fleet Foxes and Sure at 6, The Unloved Salem Fires in Heaven return after a 10-year absence at 5, Bob Dylan, Rough and Rowdy Ways at 4, Flaming Lips, American Head at 3, and Westerman, that album, Your Hero Is Not Dead, Easy Money at 2. At number 1, Abel Tesfaye from Canada arrived on the scene with 3 free mixtapes, House of Balloons, Thursday, and Echoes of Silence. I played them on this show. They completely reinvented R&B, or what R&B music could be, about 10 years ago, with very dark, neurotic music, very art house at times, extremely uncommercial, but made a massive name for himself. A very mysterious artist at that point, who we now know as The Weeknd. And since then, his pop albums, Kissland, Beauty Behind the Madness, and Starboy, haven't done it for me. They've just dipped their toes too far into the pop arena and not been consistent. But he came back this year with After Hours, his 4th studio album proper. And it was the first time that he really did get back into that neurotic, darkness. And even in an album that's full of some of the best pop writing of the year, I think this track, the